Okay. So now let us go to Section 14. What is Section 14? Section 14 of the Bill of Rights is basically the enumeration of the rights of an accused. Okay? Why do we have a special section for an accused? Well, kasi if you are accused of an offense, then there is a threat possibly against your life, but also and against your liberty, no? And maybe even your property kung may forfeiture part doon sa crime charge. So, merong special treatment if you are accused of a criminal offense. And the Constitution enumerates the rights if you are accused of a crime. Okay? First and most important is the presumption of innocence. You are presumed to be innocent. Why is that the most important? Because it shifts the burden of proof to the state. In other words, because of presumption of innocence, the burden is always on the state. That is why we always say in a democracy, okay, the burden of proof is on the accuser. He also has a right to be heard by himself and counsel. He has a right to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation. This is very important, no? To be informed of the nature and cause of accusation, because if you do not know, then you cannot defend yourself. And then the right to have a speedy, impartial, and public trial. The right to meet with the witnesses face-to-face, and to have compulsory process to secure the attendance of witnesses and production of evidence on his behalf. Okay? So these are the rights of the accused. Okay? Now, class. Okay. So, those are the rights. So let's look at some of the more important rights. No? So we begin with to be presumed innocent. This is very important because it places the burden of proof on the state. So it is wrong to say that you go to court to prove your innocence. No, that is not very accurate. Instead, the state has the burden of proving your guilt. Okay? So it is not the weakness of your defense that shouldn't put you in prison. Right? What should put you in prison is the strength of the evidence of the prosecution. Okay? So problema kasi sa Pilipinas, no? We've been under so many dictators for so long that the people's minds na have been conditioned na, oh, you have to prove your innocence. Diba? Politicians even say that, but that's not true. The state must prove your guilt. Okay? Now, let's look at some of the cases. That's why in Dumlao versus Comelec, there was a provision in an election law before that says that if criminal charges have been filed against you, that is already enough to disqualify you to run for public office. Sabi ng Supreme Court, hindi pwede yan. That the mere filing of charges will already disqualify you because that means, no, na charge ka pa lang, you are already deemed not qualified. Why? Because, well, obviously, because the mere filing of charges, meron ng view that you are already guilty. So sabi ng Supreme Court, hindi pwede yan. Okay? Now, please take note, in this case, the Supreme Court, however, discussed the validity of some penal laws that establishes a presumption. Diba? May, halimbawa, libel. Diba? Any defamatory remark is presumed to be malicious. What does that mean? Because may presumption ng malice, hindi na kailangang i-prove yung actual malice. Except if in-invoke yung privileged communication, which we discussed when we talked about freedom of speech and publications, di ba? So, to establish a presumption is not illegal, okay? Because that only establishes a presumption. That means it is still rebuttable by evidence to the contrary. But that presumption must be based on human experience and logic. No? So, while in this case, no, the presumption was wrong because it assumes already that the person charged with an offense is already guilty, it doesn't mean that a law that establishes a presumption is always wrong or always illegal. The law may do that. but it cannot be in violation of the presumption of innocence. In Feeder International, a company whose products or whose goods were seized and forfeited, questioned the forfeiture. No? Pero sabi ng Supreme Court, forfeited in relation to failure to pay the proper taxes. Sabi ng Supreme Court, una-una, forfeiture is not a criminal procedure, so you cannot invoke presumption of innocence. Second, the owner is a corporation. The presumption of innocence, the right to be presumed innocent, is only available to natural persons. Right? So a corporation, which is not a natural person, cannot invoke the right. People versus Besonia, you already know this because we already discussed this, so you are familiar with the facts. He pleaded guilty. Now, this is important, no? First, in principle, bakit na nag-plead na ng guilty, kailangan pa mag-prove ng evidence? Because, class, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. No? Second, kasi it is also, we know and we recognize the possibility that someone just pleads guilty for some other reason, not because he is truly guilty, but maybe, I mean, if you watch many documentaries about the Freedom Project, you will find out that in the United States, there were a lot of people who pleaded guilty for various reasons, not because they were. No? Iba because of hopelessness, at least sa jail, may pagkain, may kuryente, may tubig. No? Yung iba because of pressure from the police. So, various reasons. So, a plea of guilt, right, should be secondary. The prosecution must be able to prove and show the precise degree of culpability. Right? The precise degree of culpability. And this is where they failed in this case. They only proved the aggravating circumstance without proving the guilt and precise degree of culpability of the accused in this case. Right. Next is the right to be heard by counsel. Well, this is an important right because this is why we have a source of livelihood. No? Because as the Supreme Court explained in People versus Holgado, you are entitled to counsel because not even the most intelligent man can defend himself. No? Even if you're a lawyer. Well, maybe, I don't know, but kasi you can represent naman yourself. Pero ako, I had a case once, no? I was sued, not in my personal capacity, ha? Wala akong, civil case, ha? Hindi crime. Civil case, no? And I got a counsel. And my counsel was representing me in court. And sometimes hindi ko makontrol yung emotions ko kasi I'm the one involved. Eh. And that's when I realized talaga, buti na lang I decided not to represent myself. You know? Kasi I realized while we were in the court, I was a witness on the witness stand. And I realized how difficult it would have been if I represented myself. No? So that's why we are entitled to counsel. Because your right to a hearing becomes useless, your right to be heard becomes useless if you are not represented by counsel. Now, next, to be informed of the nature and cause of accusation. This is important kasi due process. If you do not know what you are being charged with, how do you defend yourself? Right? Which is why in criminal procedure, you will learn or you have learned. Have you taken up Crim Pro? No? Okay. In criminal procedure, you will learn one of the most important part of criminal procedure is the arraignment. In fact, as we will learn later, after arraignment and you jump bail, you can be tried in absentia. After arraignment, jeopardy for purposes of double jeopardy attaches. Okay? Ganun ka-importante yung arraignment. So, it is important because that is the part where you are formally informed of the nature and cause of accusation against you. That is why in criminal procedure also, when the information is defective, then you can quash the information because it does not properly tell you the nature and cause of accusation against you. Okay? People versus D is an assigned case, right? And here, you already learned about the coke and how two women were allegedly drugged so that they can be raped, no? We skipped nga pala the gory details, no? But the important part here was during arraignment, they refused to be arraigned. Okay? So, to be honest, in my opinion, kamali si judge talaga dito. So what if they refuse to be arraigned? You keep them in court and read the information. Fortunately, the information was not even read. Okay? So, I think, defective talaga yon. Kaya if you read the case, you will notice, diba, the Supreme Court just justified the decision by saying that they were properly informed of the nature and cause of accusation against them, as shown by their active cross-examination of prosecution witnesses. Diba? Yun ang sabi ng court. So, the Supreme Court had to justify the whole thing and basically said, the accused in this case were trying to hold hostage the court by refusing to be arraigned. And that should not be allowed. Okay? Because if they refuse to be informed so that they can hold hostage the court, hindi dapat payagan ng court yun. So sabi ng court, though the arraignment was defective, no, it does not taint the conviction of the accused. Now, class, sa totoo lang, this was really an extraordinary case, no? Because sa totoo lang, class, the courts, in fact, after arraignment, they are required to make you sign, no, the counsel and the accused that you were arraigned, tas merong complete records of arraignment, because without an arraignment, there can be no conviction. Okay? But here, sabi ng Supreme Court, they were informed of the nature and cause of accusation against them, despite the defective arraignment. In People versus Cachapero naman, he was raising an issue about the information, allegedly defective, allegedly because it did not inform him of the nature and cause of accusation against him. But as we already know, we discussed last meeting, the Supreme Court said, if it is not an element of the offense, then an approximation of the time is sufficient to inform you of the nature and cause of accusation against you. Kasi nga, as I told you last Tuesday, when you are charged with a criminal offense, the prosecution's duty is to prove every element. Okay? Ikaw naman, your duty is to disprove any one of those elements are present. Because if one element is absent, then that is not the crime as described in the revised penal code. So as long as you know the crime, what are the elements of that crime? What are the facts that supposedly constitute the elements of that crime? Then you can now defend yourself. Right? Since time is not an element of rape, then the Supreme Court said you are properly informed of the nature and cause of accusation if the approximate time has been alleged in the information. Okay?